morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back to everybody that's joined us before. And if you're new here, welcome to another episode of Fast Forward series. I'm Nastasia, your host for today, and I have the fortunate job of looking after you guys, representing all of you guys within Vodacom. And my sole purpose is to bring the best of what we've got available in the form of products, solutions, propositions, that help you run and grow your business and help you alongside your journey. Can you guys believe it's already December? It's literally come by so quickly. I think I'm actually quite surprised that we're all planning year-end functions, planning our leave. Everybody's asking what plans are over the Christmas period. But we thought one of the good things to cover at this time, when those who are fortunate enough to be able to go off and have a break actually have some time to deal with stress recovery. And that's why this topic for us is so important. So we're going to be joined later on by Corinne Simpson. I will reintroduce her in a second, who's going to teach us a little bit about how to combat fatigue, how to actually deal with stress recovery. And she's got a really nice framework that I love, which is building a buffer around everything we need to do to stop, pause, play, and fast forward. And that will help us get over, any of the fatigue we're experiencing. Just as a little bit of house rules, guys, we would love for this to be as engaging as possible. So when I engaged with Corinne, she actually just said, I really don't want to do a PowerPoint presentation and talk down at people. I really want to talk to and engage with people. So we will have an opportunity for you to ask any questions in the chat through to Corinne, and I'll be monitoring it on the side. And we'll obviously just make sure that you get out of this exactly what you deem fit. I see we do have a few people that are logged on. So if you can just post in the chat where you're joining us from, it would just be good to know which parts of the country you're actually representing. I do also see a couple of familiar faces or names, at least in the chat. So it would be really good if you guys can just give us a little bit of a hi in the chat itself as well. And then, we can take it from there. So we're about to kick off a very, very exciting topic, and I'd really like to introduce you guys to Corinne Simpson, as I mentioned as well. So a little bit about Corinne, and we're actually going to get into a really good discussion about a little bit more about her. But Corinne is an entrepreneur herself, and she actually works as an employee well-being specialist as well as a motivational speaker. And one of the things that I love about what Corinne is really passionate about is how she's passionate about empowering people to attain and sustain their potential so that they can derive meaning by living their passion and fulfilling their purpose. And when you guys get to engage with Corinne a little bit, in a short bit, around this topic on stress recovery, you'll see just why it's such a passionate topic for her and all the other topics that she's actually involved in that makes her an expert within this actual space itself. So I'd really like to welcome Corinne on screen. Corinne, do you want to give a little bit of a say hi to our audience?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks, Nastasia, for hosting this session, which you know is very, very close to my heart. It's good to be here with everybody.
Awesome. And we really appreciate it. So when we reached, just as a bit of a backstory, guys, when we reached out to Corinne and we actually asked her if she would be comfortable to help us alongside this topic, because we felt like it was something so important to cover, Corinne actually said to us, I'm breaking my own boundaries a little bit here, but I'm so glad to do it because this is a topic so close to my heart. And the time is now, because if everybody or a lot of people may be going off on a bit of a break, either a short break or a long break, and it just gives you a really good opportunity to apply all the frameworks and everything that she'll be sharing with us during this time. So really grateful that you could be here.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about who Corinne is. How did Corinne end up being an employee well-being specialist working within this particular space?
Well, I think my journey started way back when I actually was a child, and my parents had their own business, and so always I think we became very business literate and understood just the amazing opportunities that you can create out there without necessarily having to tag along, with a sort of big, under a big corporate umbrella. So I started back then. So I think it gave us a little bit of kind of courage as youth, and a little bit of an induction into that. But I was very fortunate that as I started to feel a calling or a pull in the direction of helping people to become more well, it actually came from a strange place. It came from a place where I had to experience my own kind of interface with HIV back in the 80s. And it kind of led me to meet the most amazing people. And I became so inspired to go down this road. And through that, if I can just fast forward down about 30 years track, I'd say that becoming the employee well-being specialist type title, I'm not one for titles. As I said to you, I'm more of a slasher. I do this, this, and this. But at the end of the day, it's really because I've been very privileged to work in that space for about 3 decades now, for various organizations. So understanding the serious side of health and the sort of health risk side of it, but also moving into, for me, is how do you touch people's lives individually and help them, like you said in the intro, to really attain their potential. So I then was able to find a little tribe, a small tribe of people who helped me to set up a company that was in the employee wellbeing space. And it was really a driving passion and desire. And that company was merged with a bigger corporate. But this is where the story started. The story started when we were working with our company, Human Dynamics, and we were on the go and on the run, and everything was very fueled by our passion and energy. And I was not listening to my body signals. And that's why I say high-functioning people get tired too. I think I'm speaking to high-functioning people out there, people who do have a drive and want to have their own businesses and want to be able to sustain that. So, yeah, so I was getting tired, but I was oblivious to what was really going on in my body. And it was only the day before we actually were merging with a bigger company that I actually had my first stroke.
Oh, wow.
I was 39 years old at the time, and I was in very much denial of what was happening. I still had things lined up, even though I was in the hospital, telling them, please hurry up. I need to get out to my next meeting, which was with the Prince Zulu of the Zulu royal family, to put an HIV community program together, and at meetings the next day. And we were doing the switch over to the new company and showing gratitude to all our people. And all the time I was sitting there doing that, nobody could understand a word of what I was saying, because in me, I was still fine. But they were saying, no, you're actually having a stroke. You've had a stroke, you're having a stroke. Well, it came to a realization overnight that, no, I probably would not be returning to work. And after a few months, I went back into the merged company to have the second stroke. And the second stroke was much more severe. And I was actually boarded. I have the note, I actually found it the other day, which basically said that the damage to the brain was so severe that I would not be able to work again. And yeah, all I can say is I sit here with a lot of gratitude to say it was about the support of my tribe, the people who had drawn alongside me to build that company. But people like, and I'm even going to mention it because it's so significant, it's people like Sandra van den Berg, and it's people like Leon Wade, and those type of people who drew alongside me.
Actually, just before we go into that, and I'm so sorry that you had to experience like a stroke, to give you a view of, there's only so fast you can go in terms of, your aspirations. Was this because you had so many plans and so many ambitions that you just felt like, I need to do more? Or was it just a matter of too much work that needed to happen and you just didn't have all the right support within the business itself?
I think we had the support if we wanted to reach it, but you must remember, as entrepreneurs, we're often our own drivers. So it was really up to me to press stop at some point and to even know how to. But, at that stage, we were just on the go, go, go. And as I say, it took a while before I actually learned that. It was 5 years later, returning back to a workspace and being given the opportunity to set up another employee wellbeing company, that we actually put heart rate monitors on ourselves and ECG monitors, and we actually were able to then start to track and trace what was happening to our body and our stress responses during the normal course of a week, and it tracked it electronically for us. And that's when I had my aha moment to say, wow, so much of what is actually going on is not what we're feeling externally, it's actually happening organically, actually internally. And that's when I started to learn about stress recovery. And that is why I'm so passionate about that topic now, because it took me that long to actually learn. And some of these things that I'm going to share with you today are really simple things. They are not earth-shattering, but they're markers that I really encourage and invite people to adopt, because I really believe that they're going to make a very big difference to being able to actually manage your bandwidth of energy.
Awesome. So Karen, share with us, you experienced the first stroke. You tried to return back to, call it a norm that you're used to in terms of how you operate, wanting to go back to everything as it was before the stroke. And then you were hit with the second stroke that actually medically boarded you. How did you recover from that? What was the journey thereafter, not being able to work because you'd actually gotten to this extent?
It was a really intense journey. From the first point of view was your source of identity in terms of your work. Society puts identity on you in terms of who you are and what do you do and where do you work. And what I learned was that it was not what I do that determined who I am, but rather who I am that determined what I do. And that was a very big learning for me. And once I had framed that and come to terms with that, I was able to then say, well, hold on a second, how do we now embrace this identity and realize that it's not necessarily linked to a job or a whatever. It's more about, as I say, it's what underlies the why of work. Why are you doing this? And I think that was your motivator. So I was motivated by the fact that, you know what, even if I can't return back to that level of functioning, I'm certainly not going to just fade away. I also found that it was the hardest first 3 years virtually of my entire life in terms of the fact of what we had to achieve. I was paralyzed down my left side. I couldn't speak properly. I had word finding difficulties, believe it or not, people, me. Word finding difficulties. I had to learn to play, and that is why I put such an emphasis on play. I learned about the power of the brain and how the brain can actually rewire, and all about neural pathways, which is some of the tips I'm going to be sharing with you today as well. And just about how to conserve energy, because all part of this, I even developed epilepsy as from part of the brain scarring and damaging, to learn to control that. And humbling, but made me just realize that there's always something you can do. And it was a day-to-day journey, really. As to fatigue is probably my public enemy number one in terms of it, because you must remember that I had a stroke and I was only 39 years old. I have recovered remarkably, and I'm very grateful for that. But at the end of the day, I have to be able to protect my health and well-being and safeguard it. And that's why, for me, these type of things are important, is how do I protect and safeguard my capacity?
Karen, I love that you touched on the aspect of, safeguarding yourself, because, you always hear the expression, you can't fill from an empty cup. So if you yourself, as a founder of an organization or, an entrepreneur leading a company, leading employees, there's a lot of pressure in all the things that you have to deal with. I mean, you've got to manage the finances, the marketing, all of those kind of topics. And a lot of what we spend our time doing around our Fast Forward series is how to better equip you at those things. But what we realized is that there's a huge gap in empowering entrepreneurs to be able to, one, see the signs, both for themselves and the employees, and to be able to respond to them as well before it's too late.
Actually,
in the form of we could end up being as dire as what it is that you just shared.
Yes,
Karen,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about what led up to this. And I hope the audience can see exactly why you're equipped and where you're going to be speaking from a place of experience in the form of this, not just what you've heard of what you've read in a textbook, but also what you yourself have experienced as an entrepreneur. I think that's incredible. Karen, over to you. Give us a little bit of a view of a framework that you think we could all adapt quite well to.
Great. Well, I think, first of all, I think this whole thing was about stress recovery. So for me, it's about understanding exactly what stress does to you. And why does stress make us tired? So I'd like to kind of start there and to just understand that when we're looking at energy, we're looking at the fact that energy is potentially a renewable resource, but time is not. So we have time and we have energy, and we can choose what we do with those two things. So they say, I was following a truck yesterday on my way back from Worcester, where I was doing a gender-based violence activation. And it said time is money. But what I realized there was it's time is value. Not money, but it's value. And we know that with life, we just seem to be just galloping along. But for us to be able to use our time wisely, we have to know how to use our energy wisely within that time, which is why I look at seeing us as having a bandwidth. Just like technologically, you've got a bandwidth that you can basically has the capacity to send signals and to be able to download things. In life, I have to strongly control how I'm managing that bandwidth. So in terms of that, you want to say, is there a lot of small stuff in my life that is taking up bandwidth, which potentially, if I don't manage or park it or stop it or pause it, will actually jeopardize what's really important when I have to download that major thing into my capacity zone. So so I think if you can just picture that as having a bandwidth and how to support that, but also to having a buffer and knowing how to really maximize a buffer in your life. Because Natasha, you mentioned, with fast forward, if you start to play something new from the start that you've downloaded like a video, then you start to play it, and very often it has to pause for it to catch up. So what I do in life is I actually start the play, and then I now know the signals when to pause. It can carry on building a buffer so that when I have to press play again, I can continue uninterrupted with my energy. So
Karen, sorry, before we continue, can you give us a couple of examples of maybe even in your own experience, and if the audience can even just share, what I'm sensing out of things that you should potentially stop or pause, are there elements like things that you should basically delegate or try and find other support structures, or is it reprioritizing the stuff that you currently have? So you still do all 10 things that you ultimately need to do. It's just you now prioritize which is going to be the first 4 things. Just to give us a little bit more of a practical view about what's stopping and pausing, what type of things should we stop and pause? And I understand it would be different for everyone, but just maybe in your experience.
I use the framework always. I think many people must be familiar with the Stephen Covey model, of work-life balance. The 7 habits of highly effective people. And I often use that in my mind, that little quadrant, and it basically says, what is urgent and important, what is urgent but not important, and what is neither urgent nor important, and then what's not important at all. And I think for me, when I look at my day, I sort of try and put those into those quadrants, and I devote my energy. I try and devote more of my energy to what is important but not urgent, because to me, that's really where my creative space thrives. Because things are important. That's what I'm driven to do. And I want to have the capacity. I want to reduce the urgency things, because obviously those take a lot of energy. And often those are the sort of more crisis management or the, those elements. But they do. I'm sure we will all agree that those are the things that send our stress spinning, isn't it? When things become urgent and driven. and often they can derail what the real purpose is. So I apply that. And so if I think about what's downloading in my life at any given time, it really can be something parked on the side that is more creative, for example, and in my zone, or it can be something that I have to attend to because of that, or the stuff that my confession is, it's the admin and stuff. That's not the stuff I really, really love, but I know that it's very important. So it's about also finding that time slot or that space for that. With stopping, what I've found amazing is to manage the fatigue that can come from just having an overload in your bandwidth is you can often just stop doing what you're doing. For example, if you're doing something in your logical brain, like the financial side, sometimes it's about taking a break and switching and picking up on maybe the creative side. What you're really doing there is you are giving a break to your logical brain, if I can oversimplify it, but to your logical brain. And what you're doing then is you're igniting your motivation and energy by using another part of your brain. It's about harnessing your neural pathways. If you think about your brain being like a tree with branches, and it can go in sort of different directions and things, but if you don't use a certain pathway, it can actually die off and things. So it's about really understanding that you've got that capacity, and it's to optimize it. I'm not sure if I'm making sense there, but it's about that you don't have to necessarily stop and go and fall asleep on the couch when you're tired. You can just switch gear into another mode and pick up on the other task that you've got on the side.
So I really like that, Corinne. And I think what I'm sensing is planning is going to be super important, because what I'm latching onto is where you said you perform or where you thrive is in things that are important but are not urgent, because then you get to be creative. So I'm guessing you plan a lot more so that you can spend a lot more of your time that before it becomes urgent, where you're basically in fight or flight, trying to urgently get it done. You are now able to actually comfortably get things done, which obviously causes a lot or results in a lot less stress on your side, because you're actually operating from a place where your passion lies. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes. But I think the other thing is to understand that in life, a lot does become urgent. And in our space, when we're dealing with human lives and people who, quite frankly, I call it the COVID mental health tsunami, not just wave. We've had a lot of things that have come in that are extremely urgent. And, the need to respond to things. I mean, if you go back to just why we're sitting online now and just the adjustments we've had to make, we looked at the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexities and ambiguities of life. And what we see there is that we've got we've got to always be adapting to that change. But for an entrepreneur, volatility presents opportunity, doesn't it? When things are kind of in flux, and that it says, hey, where's there an opportunity? Where's there a gap? And I think for many entrepreneurs, our problem is pausing a bit and maybe switching off our signals constantly, because it can be tiring to constantly be innovating. So it's choosing where do you want to be in your space, and where do you want to devote that energy right now. Yeah.
Awesome. So, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing. Again, I'd really like to hear from our audience. Have you guys identified anything that similar to Corinne, where the space where you basically thrive, but then also the space that takes a lot of energy, even if it's down to specific tasks within your business? Because I think what we'd really like to be able to do is take some of those insights and essentially assess, like, more detailed kind of frameworks or tools that we could equip you with to ultimately deal with that better. So I am monitoring the chat on the side if you guys are interested in sharing a little bit more. Awesome. Corinne, over to you.
When I think about entrepreneurs, I see us as high-functioning people. And basically, they say some of the traits of those people are that they're very interested and passionate, and yes, tick that box. But ultimately, it's maintaining the ability to love what you do and to continue and not let things rob you of that joy and excitement. But it's also the fact that often we are pushing, striving, practicing, continually trying to improve stuff and, and trying to master our space. But at the end of the day, what I really figure is your sustainability is knowing how to balance interest with effort, and to identify how work is connected to your own well-being, but as well as the well-being of others as well, because we don't exist on our own. We are often working for the interest of, can be your family, it can be your community, and it can be like ripples in a pond going out there. So for me, that is where we really sit today, is like, how do we actually find that space to connect with our well-being so that we can actually sustain our dream, really, our passion and purpose. And ultimately, what we realize is it's not an easy world. I mean, right now we're sitting on the brink with South Africa with uncertainty and leadership and all of that. And I think this is where we need to focus on things like hope and realistic optimism as well. So I'm not saying that we just exist in a bubble and in a perfect world at all, but it's about how do we function within an imperfect world. See, I think we've all come from a place where we're in a climate and environment. We know there are things that we can control and things that we can't control. And yeah, so for me, I try to realize that we might be in the same storm, but we actually are in different boats. And some of us are captains of our ships and some of us are rowing in the back. But at the end of the day, it's about how we have to navigate. And what we take with us, no matter what vessel we're in the storm, is ourselves and our own capacity to deal with the storm. And that's where we have to understand stress. So I'm just wondering out there if there are people who have actually encountered the full effect of what we call the VUCA effect, that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and how it might have affected your business out there.
I don't see any comments in the chat, Karen, but it would be good for us to get a little bit of a view. If you guys could share specifically what industry you're in, and also like what impact COVID had, good or bad, on your actual business altogether. Because we know that a lot of people experience things quite differently, and a lot of businesses. And to your earlier point, Karen, where you mentioned entrepreneurs are always in the market for innovating and being able to respond. That could be, maybe new business models, all of those kind of things that were encountered. I'd also particularly like to hear from Esmery Veneer, who is from Rest Hill as well. I mean, just from the little that I'm seeing in the background here, it would just be really good to hear about, your facility that you have around covering individuals with dementia. What did your business experience over the COVID period? And how has that impacted you as an entrepreneur as well within your space? So Karen, just around, share with us a little bit more about the VUCA effect and what your experience was with a lot of businesses that you were dealing with.
Okay, so you guys now have a basis of comparison to just see how it can vary a lot in terms of, it depends on the business sector you're in and all of that. But I think for me, the real thing here is that change affects us, whether it's a positive change or it's a negative change. We know that it affects us. So how does it actually affect us? And one of the biggest things that I was mentioning just now was that it's the whole thing about the COVID-19 era and the changes is that we're a changed people. Each and every one of us have been changed or touched or affected by it. I think no one can deny that. So even if your business might not have been affected by it generally, but were you affected by it in any way? Because to just be able to steer yourselves through this intense period has taken a lot of mental energy, a lot of resourcefulness. It has probably built a lot of resilience. And that is one of the times when I say rewind. I mean, we say stop, pause, play, fast forward. The one time I say rewind is look back. Look back at what you achieved, what the strengths were that got you through. And that's where we talk resilience. And we talk about the fact that we should celebrate the successes and actually being where we are right now. So yeah, empathic skills are going to become more and more important, but to be able to reach out and be empathetic to others, we have to understand ourselves well. So maybe, Natasha, I can just share a little bit of kind of the science or the why, because it's all very well saying what we should be doing and that, but how and what do we tap into in terms of what we were created with, the resources we were created with? So if we look at the effect of stress on energy consumption, I always say, why does stress make me so tired? But with stress, what we see that certain people respond differently to it. So you get people on a continuum, and that continuum depends on whether you see the amount of effort as being futile. Is it just kind of a waste of energy, or is it really worthwhile? But what that gets determined by is what is the nature of the challenge, and how much are you being asked to adapt to? So what is the frequency of the demands on you, and how much control, influence do you have over that? And basically what then governs that is your mindset. And what we see though at the moment is we see more and more people feeling that they're heading down towards, if you think of a battery, they feel their energy's been draining over this period of time. So you're very fortunate right now if you're highly energized. But the people I'm speaking to out there a lot through our networks, and by the way, one of my major tools in my arsenal of energy is actually being linked to networks of entrepreneurs, because you're not in this on your own. Okay, and there are people out there, and it's very good to have a sounding board for this. So in my networks and that, I'm even seeing that people are basically sustaining, if not heading down to I'm nearly running on empty. You come up with a good idea of something right now, people glaze over and they go, not now, I don't think I can. Please. So how are you? Oh, I just can't wait for my holiday. I need it. And yes, we do. And it's good to recognize that signal that you do need it. Because like I said, energy is a renewable resource, okay, if you do the right things. But it also can be depleted and can put you at serious health risk. Okay. So I'd just like to know, where do the people out there feel that they are at the moment? Do you feel that you're thriving, coping, surviving, or not surviving? Where would you place yourselves on that sort of energy continuum?
So, Karen, we actually have some responses from our audience.
Nice.
Only 13% of people feel like they're thriving. So the upper end of the battery, the fully recharged battery, actually only 13% of our audience is there. Most people are between coping and surviving. And we actually have an alarming 6% of people that are not surviving at all. What are some of the, so since we have so many more people either just making it through or actually just not making it through altogether, what would you say to, or what would some of the advice be to some of the entrepreneurs in the room?
Well, I think this is where we now need to really grapple with what are the real issues, because here you're looking at either acute situation that is something that we can remedy through daily practice and through habits, or you're looking at something a lot more serious and a lot more, that needs actual other attention. So I think let's try and understand then why might we be feeling this way? And as I say, a lot comes down to the mindset and how you're viewing the situation at the moment, but it's also the reality check that physically you might be depleted mentally. We're sitting here where the struggle is real in terms of the effects of COVID, but also the clinical effect of long COVID is a real thing, and it has potentially affected more people than we know. Even the science is saying that they're monitoring it and they're not too sure of the effect of it. But I'm very cautious not to just say, I've got a quick fix and here's a magic wand and you're all going to feel wonderful at the end of the session. I just want you to be in tune and in touch with how you're feeling and why you might be feeling like that, because you need to then address what the underlying issue is. But I think our amount of stress that we have when we're faced with any situation is really down to where we don't feel that we have capacity. So if I look at capacity, I look at my bandwidth, I look at my buffer zone. And here, if we have a trigger, and I've got a diagram that I can share, as a trigger, your little stress trigger that you're faced with, it might present with a demand, which is this purple area. And then that demand, if you're feeling you have the capacity and you're well within your capacity to manage it, that's kind of almost, it will be maybe stressful, because you do get good and bad stress, as we know. But we do know that it's not going to overwhelm you. But here comes the problem, is when you have the trigger and you have limited capacity, and the demand completely overwhelms your capacity to deal with it, that is when people get into a distress situation. You see, for most of us, what we must aim to do is to actually operate within what we call your zone. Now, when we look at someone on a low stress continuum, those people could be bored, they've got no motivation, no morale, no whatever, they're kind of there, but they're present. If they're feeling tired at that point, it's what I would call, in a very simple layman's term, it might be a lazy tired. It's because they're lacking the internal drive and motivation. On the other end of the scale, what you have is people feeling distress, where they become overwhelmed in that, where they're totally almost hyperactive, responding to the urgencies or even driven by the passions. But through that situation, you can start to doubt your capacity and ability, which can actually lower your sense of self-worth. And we know that that's so critical. Your sense of self-esteem, self-worth, and all of that is part of the brand of who you are as an entrepreneur. So, you know, if you're starting to make errors, miss deadlines, etc., then you are definitely those people who are running on empty. That is fatigue. That is total fatigue. Whereas you can expect that if you are fulfilling your purpose, you're doing your bit, you are kind of out there and you're kind of surviving and thriving, that's where you're probably operating in a zone. That's where you still have the capacity to be creative and calm and energized and motivated. You've got what it takes, but it can make you tired. So you can see how you can go from kind of a low stress situation, which no one wants to be in. And I don't think you'd be in business if that's where you operated a lot. But you want to be in the EU stress, which is the positive stress zone. But it all comes down to what is in your stress cup. So if you can imagine that you've got a capacity and it's like a glass, and when you have a funnel of stress and stress comes in and more stress and distress comes in, more and more that happens, it dumps stress hormones. And you're looking at about 28 different stress hormones. And the two that we know the most about is things like adrenaline, which sends your heart racing, your blood pumping, your blood pressure up, and all of that stuff. All good and true, kind of survival mode, let me deal with this. We've got cortisol, and it says let's release some energy because we need glucose in the system. And your stress hormone, apart from doing many other things, in simplicity, is creating some energy, releasing it. But stress hormones can become toxic, okay, in terms of the level that gets built up. So the big thing that I learned when I started to learn about stress mastery was, how do I empty my stress cup? You know, how do I actually start to put up barriers or boundaries? You know, that safeguarding that I mentioned, Nastasha, was how do I stop myself from operating with a lot of distress? And the way I do that is going back to that whole idea that I need a wider bandwidth to deal with it. I need more capacity to prevent me from becoming overwhelmed. So in terms of the effects of that unmanaged stress, we know, like, here's some symptoms to look out for. So frequent headaches, muscle tensions and pain. You know, for me, one of my things that I do now on a weekly basis is I have a DPP session, directed pressure points session, which is part of my maintenance therapy, is to deal with these muscle aches, tensions, etc., to help to release the buildup that is happening in my body of stress hormones and to give my body a break. This is when it becomes a lot more things to start looking out for: chest pains, blood pressure. When last did you check your blood pressure? I mean, you don't work for companies that offer you testing on site necessarily, but have you taken yourself off to the Dis-Chem or wherever through your medical aid plan and that, and optimized your screening benefits? Because you should be aware of what's happening. What are the measures? What's going on inside of you? Your blood sugar levels. You know, things that change, your change in your desire for pleasure, even change in sex drive, and that can be symbols of you are starting to have unmanaged stress. Think about our guts. At the moment, what we're seeing is a lot of people presenting with gut health issues. And for me, my most fascinating learning this year has been on the gut-brain axis, that whole connection between the gut and the brain, and how actually your mental health and well-being is so conditional upon your gut health. Why? Because when you become very stressed and you're feeling, and stress normally is because you're feeling under a level of threat, it's almost a primal thing that we have, a survival thing, then it's kind of, when you're facing a threat, the mind says, you know what, I don't really need to eat right now and to do all of that. I'm going to shut down on my digestive system because I need my brain and my heart and my muscles to deal with managing the situation that I'm faced with. So things like gut health become incredibly important. So I have sort of made a resolve in my life to turn my first glass of wine o'clock into my kombucha. So it's a fermented drink, and I believe it helps my gut to also be more well, because 95% of our serotonin or happiness hormones is actually generated in our guts, not in our brain. You know that thing, gut feeling, butterflies in your stomach if you're nervous and all of that? Gut-brain connection. Fascinating. So I'd say that really, if you could think about doing something important for yourselves, potentially set up an appointment with a dietitian and let's look at gut health.
So Karen, there's a very quick question, and I'm so glad you touched on this. Just if I can just share, like on a personal level, one of the things that as an employee of Vodacom, I have to go for a full medical check. And when I joined, like, I didn't quite realize why this was so important. I was like, I mean, I do this in my own time anyway, but it was one of those aspects that, my employer needed to ensure, because again, you don't see the symptoms physically manifest until it's too late. We actually have a question from Haroon on how do you prevent yourself from getting anxious prior to getting overwhelmed?
Anxiety and stress. I'm glad you've touched on that, Haroon, because anxiety and stress often get muddled up, but they are very different. So both of them respond to some form of a demand or a threat or a trigger. So stress being a real thing, something that you're really facing right now. It's you're facing the traffic right now and you've got an appointment that you've got to get to. That's real. Anxiety, on the other hand, is not something that's real. It's perceived, but it's powerful. One must never underestimate the power of perception. Okay, I always call it's the what if monster, because with anxiety, the mind interprets whatever you're feeling and your body's responding to it, and you're having actually a trauma response to it. More than you are having just a pure stress response, and they're very similar. So I've actually got a little diagram that I can share with you just to show you what sort of is happening internally. So before I get to what should you do about it, let's just understand what it is we're facing so that we can actually contain it. What we have is a situation where, and I'm not sure if you can see this diagram, but trauma upon trauma, whatever, is we know we're facing something that's concerning us and it's on our minds and everything, but the more we recall it, or the more that we actually are dealing with it, we can either tail off over time, and we can cater for that, and it's fine, and we can contain it. And I can give you breathing techniques. We'll take ourselves through one just now, but we can contain that type of thing and bring ourselves down. We can rationalize it. We can put it in its box, and we can say, right, no, that was just a perception. It's not real, etc. But frankly, when something really is an unresolved issue, then we get down to where it becomes exhausting, because your adrenaline is pumping constantly. You're in survival mode. Your cortisol and stress hormones are pumping, and you're not normalizing them. When we're looking on mind and mood, I often look at it as well. I have to ask myself, am I just feeling physically tired, mentally tired, or emotionally drained and tired? And those all are levels, those all contribute to fatigue. And mood is a very big issue, and one has to monitor mood over this time, because when we're tired, we can become very fragmented, irritable. Sometimes things can escalate just by your tone of voice, because you just don't have the energy to say it nicely. I often say, I'm trying to be nice, but I'm just so tired. So, I'm not sure if anyone else feels that way, but you have to sometimes really look at it and see, is my mood changing? Is my way of interacting changing? Maybe that's a sign of I need to press pause now, so that I can actually regroup. So when we see on our behaviors, very often when we're getting tired or fatigued, not sure about you, but what I want to do is I want to jump up and get another cup of coffee, or sure, I'm tired now, and let me just quickly eat that chocolate bar, or, you know, that can also be where we're so busy that we lose our appetite because of our stress response to what we're dealing with, but also we're not then nourishing our bodies. And I also say you should be looking at just so what is your pattern of that? And maybe those are your set points of pause, is regular eating patterns, and sitting down, for example, and saying, I will eat my meal, not at my computer. I'm going to actually eat my meal sitting at the table. And that's a time that I also connect with those people around me, because that's so important on also helping us to reduce our sense of overwhelm. Some of the things to really stop is looking at the sort of use of substances, drug or alcohol misuse to get us through as well. Even tobacco use. You know, people say, I'm stepping out for a smoke break. Yes, that's great. You're getting some vitamin D while you do that. Nothing wrong with that. It's a very social thing too. Often people will join you, and that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, what do we know about it? We know enough. I don't even have to go there. But we do know that it's a stimulant, but it's going to drop you. It's not going to sustain you up there. And ultimately, it can have negative impacts down the line. So that's also where you would press stop as such. Social withdrawal. Yes, it depends on your temperament. A lot of how we manage stress depends on our temperament. If I'm an extrovert, managing stress for me, I surround myself with more people. Generally, I will get energy from that. But if I'm an introvert, then it's going to drain me to be around a lot of people and things. So maybe my social withdrawal is necessary and is a very good technique if I am a more introverted. But if I'm an extrovert and I find I'm becoming socially withdrawn, I have to start wondering, why do I not have the capacity for what used to bring me joy, energize me, or make me happy? That can be a signpost as well. And also exercising, you know, you can end up saying, well, I just don't have the time to exercise, or I'm just too tired. But energy generates energy. So I find an amazing thing is when I get up and I go for a walk, I go for a swim, and all of those things, I actually energize myself. It's like my own generator of energy. So yeah, these are just some of the touch points there. What we need to be very careful of is burnout. Nastasia, really, this is where a lot of people are saying I'm feeling burnt out, whereas maybe they're just very fatigued at the moment. And there definitely is a comeback from that, but through some techniques. But it's when one starts to really become burnt out that it becomes a long-term risk. So here, when I had my strokes, I was very stressed. You can call it eustress. I was probably a little bit on the kind of from my zone going into the more manic zone. But you're overengaged if you're very stressed, and your emotions can be overreactive, and you're out there and you're urgent and everything's hyperactive, and you're tossing those balls in the air and you're busy and don't throw me another ball because I've got enough in the air and all of that. But that can lead, Haroon, to anxiety disorders too, because you now worry, am I going to drop a ball? What is going to happen? Do I have what it takes? The primary damage here is the physical that you were talking about, Nastasia, the things we measure when we have a basic health check every year, because that damage can be physical. And for me, when I had my strokes, people say, what was it? Was it your high blood pressure, whatever? No, I actually had a low blood pressure, but I actually had an underlying genetic factor for blood clotting. But the cortisol in that created, in simplicity, I'll put it, like a stickiness in the blood vessels. So the clots didn't just pass through easily, they got lodged, which actually helped sort of deprive the brain of oxygen for longer. So yeah, so that primary damage that you have when you're very stressed, and the stress hormones on your body, they actually can damage you physically, and they can kill you from a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. However, burnout's the other end. So now, for those people that I'm concerned about here, those people who said, I'm running on empty, okay? If you find you're disengaged, your emotions are very blunted, you just can't. You're feeling helpless and hopeless. You've lost your motivation, ideals, and hope. And when you hear people like Karen saying, oh, I love passion and pursuing and all of those words, and you're thinking, can't, no, that's just too much. It can lead to detachment and depression, clinical depression, and symptoms of depression are helplessness and hopelessness. And the primary damage is emotional. It's what's happening to you as a person with burnout. And it might make life not seem worth living. And what is the risk there? We have to say it. We have to name it. The risk of that is suicide. That the risk of saying, you know what, I just don't have what it takes. And I'm saying you don't need to get to there. That's when you need to reach out and say, you know what, I'm pulling myself out of this. Because, you know, even those matches, if we look at those matches, even when that match is kind of almost done, and that it actually does still have some energy to give in terms of its potential to reignite. So don't wait until it's too late. I'd say, because when I say that burnout effects are long-lasting, burnout effects, you might not see the change in your health immediately, but cholesterol changes are noted 2 to 3 years after burnout. And the consequences are that they drive up those metabolic syndrome, that we call it, the higher cholesterol, your cardiovascular risks, your blood glucose levels, that leads to diabetes and things. And it increases your risk of depression. And South Africans in particular, the researchers said that we have a 25 times greater chance of getting depression and mental health decrements anyway. So in this environment, please, it's something to take very seriously. So if you are suffering from chronic fatigue, you need medical attention for it. Okay. I lost 5 years in my life from the age of 39, which was quite a prime time, because my body had said stop, and I didn't have burnout. Now, the things that someone with burnout, for example, they're going to take a long time to pull themselves up and out. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, you are the brand, you are the business, safeguard yourself against burnout, because you are what it takes for your business.
Karen, we have a very quick question from Candice, and she asked if you could share some ideas on how you can help a person move from feeling stressed to the point that it's crippling, to shifting them to taking action with the things that's within their control.
Hi, Candice. Hello. Yeah. So I think the first thing is to recognize exactly where you're at and what those stress symptoms are, and knowing what to do. So if you're referring to what we do I'm going to ask Candice a question. Are you referring to what we do, say, on a daily basis in response to that?
They would take some time for Candice to respond in the chat, but maybe we can just touch on things that you can do, basically what's within your control on a daily basis, and then a lot more long-term if necessary, because you find that the things that you're equipped with are not helping to move you to a good place.
Yes, that's great. I think this is where we define our fatigue levels as a result of stress. So it's understanding what is our stressor, what impact is it having, how do I empty this cup? So we understand, I'm now feeling tired. Is it acute? Would this resolve once the cause has been addressed? So once I've got through the initial stress, I've dealt with the issue and the demand, or I've got through it, because you can get tired from having an acute illness, especially a viral illness or something like that, or deadline's finally been met, and now you take some time out, or a life-changing event, even a happy event, maybe it's even a wedding or a great occasion or whatever. Does your energy get replenished after that through doing basic things like rest and recovery, like just that pause that we say, or going for counseling, short-term counseling to put you on track, or through practicing daily lifestyle habits, then you can resolve from acute fatigue levels. But for chronic ones that persist independently to any attributable reason. So these would be the things that you're tired and you just don't know why. And yes, you know you're busy and you know all of that, but it really is that you just can't get out of this. That's when we need to take it seriously in terms of saying, is there an underlying reason to identify that's got a physical or mental health root? Was it a systemic dysfunction? Because when I say systemic dysfunction, it can even be an industry we operate in that doesn't give you support, or or just systems that are failing us, that just, it's no matter what I do, no matter what effort I put into it, I can't change it. That's where you need psychotherapy. So that is where we now need to get into the more clinical space and clinical diagnostics of what could the underlying reason be. It could be a chronic illness, and that's what you need medical treatment for. And yes, with medical treatment, always there's a lifestyle factor. Lifestyle always underlies everything to do with that. So some of the things you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you look at the quality of your sleep. Because when we look at replenishing energy, we straight away go to sleep. We think about that. So replenishing your energy, what do you need? how much sleep? It's an interesting question to ask yourselves. What is your average amount of sleep that you have every day? So how do you actually protect that bandwidth of yours? See, sleep isn't stopping necessarily, it's starting other processes. And what happens is we don't activate those processes if we're not getting enough sleep. So most people need between sort of 7 to 9 hours sleep a night, especially if you're functioning quite high. And when we did our survey recently, we found that of those business leaders, there were so many of them that were getting between 5 and 6 hours sleep per night, which is way too little. So I'm not sure where you're at. And certainly if you have things like anxiety that are interrupting your sleep, you won't be having restorative sleep. You see, 50% of the people who had between 4 and 6 hours of sleep said that only 18% of them said their sleep was restorative. So yeah, we all function differently. I happen to be a night owl and all of that. So it's not about the time you go to sleep or whatever, but it's the amount of sleep you have. Then I ask myself, why? Ask yourselves, do you wake up tired? Maybe this is a good time to look at that. How do these people feel about how their sleep quality is working for them? Yeah, so we got the poll up there.
So we do have a poll. I just want to see what the responses are. Fatigue check-in. So we've got about 67% of people that actually confirmed that they wake up feeling tired. Wow. And we actually have 22% of people that said they feel less tolerant, just from a fatigue perspective. So I think it's
quite significant, yes.
Quite significant, yeah, in terms of the uptake.
That is significant. So it comes back to Candice's question, which is like, let's start with our sleep quality. And again, I'm very mindful of the fact that our sleep is interrupted by life too. I mean, if you've got small children, or if you've got pets, or you've got every one of us, we've got load shedding that kicks in right in the middle of our sleep cycles. Hey, do you also get it where suddenly everything starts to go on, the alarm and the bell and everything? Hey, or am I the only one? But even that, I mean, we're getting interrupted sleep. And we understand that. But I do have an antidote to that. And that antidote to that is your power nap. And that is a really nice secret tool. And the power of the power nap must not be underestimated for helping to make up for some sleep debt. So if you find you have interrupted sleep, one of the things you can do is to look at that in terms of how to do that. Because your poor sleep will impact you. For one thing, if you have poor sleep, it can even impact your length of life, your immune function, your mental health, all of those things. Every aspect of your body, mind, body, and even comes down to affecting your relationships too, because obviously less tolerant. Look at how many people alluded to less tolerance. So I often ask myself, well, why do I need 7 to 9 hours sleep? Well, if you have a look, I've got a diagram of sleep stages. And in this diagram, I'm not sure if you can see it there, but in that diagram, we have, in the gray area, we have what we call non-REM sleep. This is kind of your more deep sleep. And then you have REM sleep, which everybody talks about. You know, if you're watching someone sleep and they're jiggling around or their eyelids are fluttering, all of that, that's your REM sleep. And what you need to do is you'll find when you fall asleep, you go into a deep cycle, and then you go into a REM cycle, and you'll see you shallower and shallower as you're getting towards 7 to 8 hours sleep. If you interrupt your sleep when you're in a deep sleep process, you are going to wake up feeling tired. You need to allow yourself to go through those cycles, and each cycle is about 40 minutes. That's where they get this 7 to 9 hour story from. So just understand that you might even feel like, well, I've just been asleep, whatever, but in what cycle have you been interrupted if you've been woken? Or in what cycle have you not allowed yourself to process? See, for me, what is fascinating is during even REM sleep or sleeping, you're not doing nothing. You're actually processing a lot of stuff. And that is where we're going to get our drive from, our motivation, our emotion regulation, our memory formation, the stuff that we did today and that we need to consolidate in our memories, even our sense of arousal and empathy and desire and pleasure. All of that is happening during those sleeps. So who wouldn't want more of those, hey? Even complex visual processing that is going on in the brain. So you're missing out. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not going through the cycles, you're actually missing out on gearing yourself up and energizing and fueling yourself for what you need to run your business and to be able to have that motivation going forward. So just in terms of what else to do about that, when we look at stop, we look at relaxation also as a major element. And this is where relaxation is what resets our trigger points for emotional hijacking. Okay, so you find that if you don't take time out, when we're busy, it's the one thing we don't think about is stopping or pausing, is it? So here's a place to do it. This is where you need to have some form of relaxation technique. And it depends what works for you in terms of relaxation. But it's worth it to pursue it, because if you can have less distress, remember that cup filling up with distress, if you can have less distress, and you can have shorter bouts of distress when you do have them, if you do have them, you're going to have the capacity then to be able to practice in your zone. So one of the most practical things is breathing. And don't underestimate this. This is something that I learned. That is something that I do all the time. I do it regularly through the day, and I have different patterns of doing it. So prepare yourselves wherever you are now, and prepare yourselves now to practice some self-regulation and stimulate some energy, because you will find that the exchange of the deep breathing, which is the oxygen and the glucose, and what it's doing to you mentally, and by stimulating your parasympathetic responses in your brain, you're going to find that you can actually achieve a fairly ultimate healthy state of well-being, is what they say. That's what the science says. But let's practice this. So I want you to just be where you are and maybe sit comfortably, or maybe it's time to even stand up. But just watch the screen, because we're going to show you, I hope, a little animation. And I want you to follow the animation. And the animation is numbered. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically breathe in, and those are kind of seconds. And then you're going to hold. And then just follow it through mindfully and breathe out. And just give it all you've got. And we're going to do that over 3 times, and then just see how you feel. So I really invite you to engage in this, because this is just something you can do anywhere, anytime. And the count is not what matters necessarily here, because you can develop your own patterns. So I've got what I call my box breathing, my 4-4-4-4 breathing. I've got various sort of counts and numbering that I use for different techniques. But this is basically what it is. It's about inhaling. So if you bear with me now, just inhale through your nose, okay? Through your nose, not your mouth. Your stress response is through your mouth. If you see something shocking, you go, but this one is through your nose. Fill your lung capacity and hold it. And then you will release it through your mouth. Okay, until you've completely depleted what's there. Right, we'll start the cycle just now as soon as it gets onto green. Let's go. Cool. How's that feel? Any responses there, Natasha? You feel a bit lightheaded? Can you feel your heart beating?
Yeah, a little lightheaded, but I immediately jigged my shoulders straight after. It felt like this, whoo, in the rest of my body. But it actually is a really nice feeling.
Yeah. And it's something that you just take a break, and you can do it anywhere. You can do it in your motor car. You can do it like me, just pre this session, when we've had tech breaks, whatever. It just helps you to regulate and get your heart regulated, your beating properly, your blood pressure down. If you have a blood pressure problem, it's an amazingly powerful but simple tool that you can practice. And for anxiety, going back to that, this is one of the key techniques. When you're in a moment and you're anxious and you're starting to feel overwhelmed, to reduce that overwhelm is to start with the breathing technique. It's quite a vital technique to have. The other one is your 90-second pause. Why 90 seconds? because they say the 90 seconds gives you a chance to convert a reaction to a response. And in that time, you assess the situation. So you can remember I said what you can control, what you can't control, and then somewhere in between, which is how do I respond to this and see this. That buys you time to be able to regulate and to think clearly so that you can govern your response. And if you start to master this technique of your response governing, then you'll find that you actually build your energy and capacity to deal with the situation at hand. So often we just wired, fired, and we're ready to just go for it and respond. I must be on the gap. Nothing wrong with just saying, just give me a moment, let me get back to you, or let me just think about that now, or just bouncing it back to something. If the response is coming from another source, bounce it back to them to give you the time to process that situation in the moment. Mindfulness was another thing I learned. Now, to be mindful, don't poo-poo this either. This is not about just going off into some imaginary daydream. This is a very considered approach. They often talk about meditation and mindfulness together, but mindfulness is not just meditation. Is I focus on, say, one thing, or I have a pattern of something that I know and I've practiced, and it's a technique I have, and there's various meditation techniques. For me, mindfulness is about being present in the moment. So it's about getting up, standing outside, for example, with my eyes shut, and tuning into what is going on around me. At first, there's very little. All I've had is a shift in terms of temperature, maybe, whatever. But the longer I stay in the moment and I listen out, what are the sounds I'm hearing? What are the smells I'm smelling? Even the tastes. How am I in my being? But more than just where I am in me, what is going on around me? And I absorb all of that. And through doing that, again, I am now moving into the space of transcendence, where I am moving away from the pressure zone into the capacity zone. So I'm building that. So it's an amazing thing. And with this comes a sense of gratitude, because you can't, in a mindful moment, when you're actually starting to focus, and in a mindful moment, you could go and try and focus on something not so pleasant, but I don't advise that at all. I think focus on something that really resonates with your soul, something that really brings you joy or sparks joy, because gratitude is one of the most powerful elements of well-being. It's the art of being thankful and showing appreciation and extending kindness. And when we do that and we get out of ourselves too, we start to step into where we can really see where we are, and it gives context in terms of the bigger world as well, and what we can contribute. I always say that giving is one of the most selfish things you can do, because you're guaranteed to get so much back in return. And it's not necessarily back in return. You don't always expect it back from the source where you're giving, but it gives back in terms of your own gratification. So I think that whole thing around meaning in terms of what you do. And the other thing that's important is, in terms of happiness, there's a thing called centrality. And I really want you to think about this, because that was a lesson I only really grasped the other day. Was someone said to me, sure, you're tired, and yes, what you're doing, you're so lucky. I'm very blessed. I work in an amazing field, and I really love what I do and everything. Yes, that's so true. But they said, so are you doing the stuff you enjoy? And my thing was, when last did you do a painting, or when last did you go and do snorkeling at the beach, or go on a hike, or whatever? And I suddenly realized that I'd been too busy to do those things that were actually central to my joy and my well-being. And I can offer a lot more when I spend time there, because I am bringing more of myself into the room, into the space, into the engagement and interaction with people. So that centrality, identify what is it that makes you tick, what is it that your reason for being, and make sure you find time to do that and to fulfill that. Not one day when I retire or when I've got time, whatever. Weave it into your everyday if you can. If not your everyday, into your every week. Like Louise and I were chatting about what she does on the weekends. And again, try and do those things. Sometimes help to stimulate those mental pathways, and that create your neuroplasticity. Yeah, as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about that me time, zone time, that pause time that you can create for yourself. And then when we have to press play, you see, play is putting things into action. okay? And it's also play as in the fun factor that we mentioned earlier. But what I find is I need to eliminate the noise, the not important things. And now that we're going away and we are taking a break, one of the things that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be rearranging the applications on my phone. So I want you to think about what is on your phone. What notifications are you receiving? When I'm very much in my work headspace, guess what? Guess which apps are the closest at hand? Which notifications are the loudest? They are those things that help me, obviously, in my business and that generate my income and that actually I need to be on top of for that. But I'm going to shift some of those aside and I'm going to go and move my home screen and I'm going to bring on board my headspace for my mindfulness stuff. I'm going to bring on board my things like calm and nurture. I'm going to be, my Fitbit is going to be reactivated big time while I go and spend my energy out doing enjoyable stuff, for example. So I encourage you to eliminate the noise that you have maybe sitting there that is kind of symbolic on your device, and just reorder your thinking and use this time to also look at refining your boundaries, not just defining, refine your boundaries, because just work out where are those places, because you need to obviously protect your well-being. That's who's responsible for that, not other people. And I find that by saying no to the right things, I actually open the door to saying yes to the really great things, because not everything we say no to is not nice. It might be a case of saying, well, not for now, but you can pick up on something later. But refining your own boundaries and to understand, also reflect, maybe, yeah, again, a little bit of a rewind, reflect. What went wrong this year? Why are you so tired? And maybe it had something to do with allowing people into the territory where you operate the best, which distracted that and absorbed energy. Networks are really, really important. Supportive connections, social connection is vital. So I really encourage that. So connect with people. Yes, again, my device, FaceTiming my friends who are far off and that, but also finding those times for the coffee break and the walk and talk, I believe in strongly, to get rid of excess cortisol. The one way to get rid of it, because cortisol can build up to toxic levels in your system, is to walk, is to exercise. So if you want to connect socially and you want to be able to get rid of your excess stress hormones, then walk and talk. I strongly recommend you do something active with your friends. Not necessarily sitting down at a restaurant. That's a good thing too. But think about it. Let's go for a walk. Let's go and experience something together. Let's go and play together. Literally have playtime and make playtime. And it's about also looking at how we view the world. We can either choose to have optimism, and here I talk about realistic optimism. I'm not silly, I'm not pie in the sky, whatever, but it's that, and try not to spend your time in any negative stuff. It's going to be difficult, eh? We've got a whole presidential debate on the go and whatever. It's going to be difficult ring fencing your conversations, but it's your choice how much you allow in and how much you are going to allow to absorb your energy during this amazing time. If you have got only limited time, you need to protect that. You're never going to get that time again. Yeah. So your power nap, and I come back to something else to practice, is your 20 minutes 3 times a week. Okay. So we know that it can actually reduce risk of heart disease and things. So we also know that it's, and I think I need to give you the justification, because some of us out there that are highly driven need to know that we're not just wasting our time. No, with a power nap, you're not. So you're boosting your energy, recovering some sleep debt, and you are also increasing your spatial ability and mental performance. Okay, and even your motor tasks, anything you've been trying to master the art of, things like power naps, so short, brief breaks can actually just give you that restart time to consolidate what you've been trying to master out there.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing so many of these little support structures and elements that we can basically cover. One of the things that I just want to make sure that we've basically closed off on is, if I can recap on what the message you've basically left with us, is that we need to be able to stop, right? Stopping is as important as knowing when to start and when to go fast. We've got to be able to pause. Pausing is as important as knowing, again, some things may never be restarted, But when you put things on pause, you know you're going to pick it up and go forward. Play, super, super important in terms of making sure that there's time for fun. And then also the recharge element that helps us basically go forward. Is that a good overview of basically the little, call it modules and little tips along the way that are quite important for entrepreneurs to be able to do stress recovery quite effectively?
Yep, I think that certainly is an overview. Thank you for keeping track of all of that and for just bearing with me as I run along with this passion. I hope there have been some useful practical tips. I think if your take home from here might be that there's areas that you wouldn't mind knowing more about or developing further. Those might be things you put onto your to-do list for the new start or the new year as well, because don't ignore your own well-being. I think that's really what I really have a heart for, is that use this time wisely to focus on yourself, because you are the person that's going to walk into all the new opportunities. You are the one who's going to confront the challenges, and you owe it to yourself to have the best, most robust bandwidth to be able to cater for whatever's coming your way.
And I love the tip that you've left for everybody as well, as if people are lucky enough to be able to go away and get a break, even if it's just over a weekend or 2 or 3 days or the period between Christmas and New Year, move your notifications away. One of the things that I'm quite deliberate about is I try to switch off even on a weekend any work emails coming through, because either the unread notifications or any of the alerts that might come through on any of those standard kind of reports that come through daily can actually take you back into stress mode, even if you just glanced over it. So I really love that tip. Alongside the breathing, I see there's also some feedback from Candace that it felt really good as well as she went through it as well. So Karen, I really appreciate you spending time with all of us. And I'm sorry that we've gone a little bit over, but it's just this topic we're so passionate about. And we look forward to engaging with you pretty much again in the new year, hopefully, where we can go into specific topics as well. But anything that anybody would like to find out more about, or anything you would want to engage with Karen a little bit further, please post it in the chat, and we will make sure that we help craft this support network in the form of stuff related to stress recovery. So just as we close for our last session for this actual year itself, Karen, is there anything else that you just want to basically close off on your side before we say goodbye to our audience?
Well, a very big thank you from me. Thank you to everybody for investing your time, and thank you for the opportunity. Nastasia and team, it's been an absolute pleasure to end my work year. I head off now on leave. So thank you for the privilege. And I just want to wish everybody well. And yeah, I really do admire you all for the amount of passion and input that you have shown just by being here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And guys, for those of you that want to play back or go through any of the sections that were covered today, if you want to remind on some of the play tips, this session will be uploaded on VHub, especially before we go on break. So hopefully you can engage with this content as well while you're on a break, or even just share it with any of the other entrepreneurs in your network that couldn't make it here today. Okay, guys, on that note, have an awesome period of rest. If you're going to be trading and this is your busy period, best of luck. I really hope that the amount of sales and revenue is well worth your while over this particular period. And when you can take a break, I really hope that you will apply some of the principles that you've learned today. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch soon. Cheers, everyone.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye. Cheers.